I'm going to start with something my rescue team said the moment they pulled me out of that canyon. There's no way you survived this long, and there's definitely no way you got those marks on your arms out here alone. I didn't argue with them. I couldn't. Because even after everything I lived through, even after replaying those 11 days over and over again in my head, I still don't know exactly what was following me out there, or why it never let me sleep for more than a few minutes at a time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what really happened, exactly the way I remember it. It started as a simple solo trip. I'd done dozens of them before. I'm the kind of person who likes walking where the map looks empty, where the sky feels too big for the world, and where you can hear your own heartbeat. My plan was to hike along an old trading route in the desert, something that barely existed anymore except on dusty historical prints and half-erased trail markers. 11 days was supposed to be the total length of the journey. I brought supplies for 14 just in case, but I only used them for 2, because by the third morning, everything changed. The first sign that something was wrong happened right after sunrise. I'd camped near a rock formation shaped like a broken pillar, flat on one side, sharp on the other, like a blade pointing toward the sky. I remember waking up early, making coffee, preparing my gear, checking the GPS, all the standard routine stuff. Nothing strange. Nothing that would have warned me about the nightmare ahead. But when I started walking, the GPS began losing signal. Every couple of minutes at first, then every few seconds. I wasn't worried. This happens in remote deserts all the time, so I switched to compass and visual navigation. Miles and miles of sand, stone, and heat stretched in every direction. I've dealt with that before. It never scared me. Around mid-afternoon, I stopped to drink water and noticed that the wind had changed direction. Normally, that means nothing, but the desert I was in had this unusual habit. The wind almost always blew from the west. Locals even joked that you could orient yourself by the sand hitting your face. But now the wind came from the north, strong and sudden. The air felt heavier, hotter, still somehow colder at the same time. I know that sounds impossible, but that's how it felt. I kept walking, and for hours there was nothing but silence. Not the peaceful silence you expect in the desert. This one felt loaded, like the landscape itself was holding its breath. Even the wind stopped. No insects, no birds, no echoes of distant shifting dunes. Nothing. I didn't like it, but I kept going. When the sun began to drop, I realized something was off with the shadows. They were shorter than they should have been, angled differently, and I swear this is something I still struggle to explain. They didn't always match my movements perfectly. There were moments when I stepped forward, and the shadow hesitated before following. I blamed exhaustion. I blamed dehydration. You'll blame that too, until you hear what happened next. As night settled in, I reached an old dried riverbed and set up camp. The temperature dropped fast. Desert nights punish you for being unprepared. But I had my insulated bag, my tarp, and my protective layer. I wasn't worried. Around midnight, I woke up to a faint sound. A tapping. Not loud, not threatening. More like a fingertip hitting a tin cup. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, waiting for it to repeat. It did. 3 more times. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the area. Nothing. My backpack was zipped. My tent was intact. The dry ground around me showed no footprints except mine. Then, from behind the rock wall of the riverbed, I heard it again. Longer this time. Tap, 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 tap. I shined my flashlight toward the sound and saw something. At first, I thought it was a person crouching behind the rocks, but the shape wasn't right. Too thin, too tall, too still. When the light touched it, it moved, but not in a normal way. It slipped behind another rock without bending or turning. It just slid. My breath got stuck in my throat. I stayed awake until sunrise, gripping my knife with shaking hands. Every few minutes, the tapping returned, sometimes close, sometimes far away. It felt like something was circling me, testing me, waiting for me to fall asleep again. When the first light broke across the sky, the tapping stopped. I packed everything fast, didn't even finish breakfast, and walked until my legs burned. The heat grew heavier. the kind that sticks to your lungs and makes every breath feel like it weighs something. But I kept going. Around noon, the GPS finally shut down completely. No signal, no power, nothing. My compass needle kept drifting too, twitching like it couldn't decide which direction north was. I've never seen a compass behave like that. By the end of the day, I was sure I'd walked at least 12 miles. But the terrain didn't match the charts I studied. The canyon walls seemed taller than they were supposed to be. The dunes had shifted in ways that didn't make sense. And the sky looked wrong. You know how in the desert you see those shimmering waves on the horizon? Mirage distortions caused by heat? Well, this wasn't that. The sky itself seemed to ripple like something beneath it was moving. When night came, I didn't want to stop, but my legs gave out. I found a small patch of flat earth between two narrow canyon walls and set camp again. I stayed awake for as long as I could, but exhaustion eventually dragged my eyes shut. I don't know how long I slept. Maybe an hour, maybe 10 minutes. But I woke up because something was breathing near my ear. Not loud, not aggressive, just there. A slow, deep inhale, like someone who had been waiting for me to fall asleep. I froze, every muscle locked. The air around me felt colder. Not desert night cold, presence cold. Like something alive was standing over me, blocking the warmth. I didn't turn my head, I just opened my eyes a little. And that was when I saw it. On the canyon wall across from me, my shadow was stretched long and tall. But I wasn't sitting up. I was lying flat on my back. The shadow didn't match my position, not even close. And then it moved. It raised an arm. My real arm didn't move. It turned its head toward me. I didn't turn. That was when I snapped fully awake and scrambled backward, grabbing my flashlight. When I shined it at the canyon wall, the shadow disappeared instantly, like someone had cut a string. But the breathing didn't stop. Not right away. It faded slowly, like whoever or whatever was beside me stepped back into the darkness 1 inch at a time. I sat there with the flashlight on until sunrise. It felt like the longest night of my entire life. The next morning I noticed something else wrong. Footprints. A set of them circling my campsite. Not my own. Too large, too deep, and spaced too far apart. Whoever made them had a long stride. They weren't human. No human foot looks like that. I checked my arms, and that was the first time I saw the marks. Thin lines, perfectly parallel, running across my skin like something had touched me gently while I slept. Not scratched, not cut, just marked. I started walking again without looking back. By the afternoon of day 4, my water reserves were running dangerously low. I should have turned back long before, but by that point I wasn't sure which way back even was. My sense of direction had collapsed. The landmarks I remembered were gone or rearranged. The sun seemed to sit higher in the sky longer than it should, and every mile felt like 2. I kept hearing the tapping too, sometimes faint, sometimes right behind me. If I turned around fast enough, I'd catch something out of the corner of my eye. A tall shape, a flicker, a shadow that didn't belong to me. It always disappeared when I looked directly at it. The real breaking point happened on night 6. By then, I was running on almost no sleep. My mind felt blurry, my legs shaky, my throat dry. I'd rationed water to tiny sips, even breathing hurt. But I managed to set up a weak campsite against a low ridge. No fire, no noise, just darkness. I passed out almost instantly. What woke me this time wasn't tapping. It wasn't breathing. It wasn't footsteps. It was whispering. A voice, soft, quiet, almost gentle, whispering my name. Not once, over and over again. At first I thought it was in my head, a hallucination from dehydration. But then something touched my ankle, lightly, like fingertips brushing along the bone. I bolted upright. My heart nearly ripped out of my chest. The whispering stopped immediately. But there, at the edge of my vision, I saw a figure standing just beyond the reach of the starlight. Tall, impossibly thin, almost blending with the canyon wall behind it. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see hands. Just a silhouette that wasn't shaped like any person I've ever met. And then it leaned forward. Not stepped, not bent, just leaned, like its upper body could move independently from everything else. I grabbed my pack, didn't even bother closing it, and ran. I don't remember how long I ran. Minutes, hours. The adrenaline erased everything except the need to get away. I stumbled, fell, scraped my hands, tore my knee open, but I didn't stop. When I finally collapsed, the sky looked different. Not darker, not brighter. Just off. Clouds that weren't clouds. Light that didn't come from the moon. The horizon pulsed faintly, like heat lightning but without sound. For the first time since the tapping started, I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit that. Anyone would've. I cried because I didn't know where I was anymore, because I didn't know what was hunting me, because the desert felt alive in a way it shouldn't, because every grain of sand seemed to shift just slightly toward me, like the whole place wanted me to stay. But mostly, I cried because I knew, really knew, that nobody was coming for me. Not in time. On day 7, everything changed again. I woke up at dawn, though I'm not convinced it was dawn. The sky looked red, not sunrise red, more like the entire atmosphere had blushed. The rocks around me had a faint metallic shine. The wind tasted like dust and iron. Then I heard something new. Not tapping, not whispering, not breathing. Drums. Rhythmic. Slow. Deep. Like someone hitting a hollow log with incredible force. The sound vibrated through the ground, into my bones. It came from the direction of a narrow canyon, one I didn't remember passing through before. Every instinct told me not to go near it. So I walked toward it, not because I was curious, but because the sound didn't feel like danger. It felt like a signal, a guide, something trying to lead me somewhere. I walked through the canyon, each thump echoing across the stone, bouncing back at odd angles. It felt like the canyon had more corners than it really did, like the walls were rearranging themselves behind me. Halfway through, the drums stopped. Silence. Not desert silence. Worse. A pressure filled the air. Static so strong I could feel it in my teeth. My skin prickled. My hair lifted. Then I saw it. A wide clearing at the canyon's end. Flat, circular, unnaturally smooth. Like dozens of hands had polished the stone over centuries. In the center stood a spiral carved into the ground, impossibly precise, glowing faintly as if lit from below. My head throbbed the moment I looked at it. My ears rang, my stomach twisted. But I couldn't look away. That's when the shadow appeared again, this time crossing the spiral. It didn't glide. It walked, but its steps didn't match the sound. No crunching gravel, no shifting sand, just silent movement. It turned toward me. I stepped back so fast I nearly fell. The marks on my arms, those thin parallel lines, burned suddenly, like someone had pressed something hot against them. I didn't wait for the shadow to reach me. I ran. I ran until my lungs screamed, until my legs buckled, until the spiral clearing vanished behind a wall of heat. Eventually, I collapsed under an outcropping of rock and stayed there until nightfall. That's when the worst part happened. I don't like remembering it. I hate telling it. But if I'm going to tell this story honestly, I have to. When the sun set, I noticed something was wrong with my hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. Not from cold, not from fear, not from dehydration. Something else. My fingertips looked darker than the rest of my skin. Not bruised, not dirty, almost burned, like they had touched something too hot except I felt no pain. Then the shaking spread to my arms, then to my chest. Not violently, just enough to make me feel like I wasn't fully controlling my own movements. And then I heard a sound behind me, a quiet exhale. Not human, not animal, something between the two. I turned slowly and saw a figure crouched only a few feet away, close enough that I could see its outline clearly, close enough that I could hear its breathing, close enough that if it reached out, it would touch me. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move, I couldn't think. The figure leaned closer, and for the first time, I saw part of its face, or what should have been its face. No eyes, no mouth, no features, just smooth darkness like a silhouette someone cut out of midnight and glued onto the world. It raised a hand, long fingers, smooth skin, no nails. It touched my forearm gently, so gently that under any other circumstance I might have thought it was trying to comfort me. But the moment it touched me, the marks on my arm spread. New lines appeared, thin, glowing faintly blue, forming patterns too perfect to be natural. I yanked my arm away and scrambled backward, hitting the rock wall. The figure didn't chase me. It simply stood up, slowly, smoothly, and tilted its head as if studying me. Then it melted into the darkness behind it, like it had never been there. I didn't sleep that night, or the next one, or the one after. By day 9, I was hallucinating shapes in the sky, hearing whispers buried beneath the wind, seeing footprints appear in the sand and disappear moments later. On day 10, I stopped seeing the creature, but I felt it. Always behind me, always watching, always waiting. And on day 11, when the rescue team finally found me, I wasn't alone. They saw something run behind the rocks. They won't admit it publicly, but they told me privately, "Whatever followed you out here, we don't want to meet it again." And that was only half of what happened. When the rescue team spotted me on day 11, I wasn't sure if they were real or just another mirage twisting itself into human shapes. I remember hearing someone shout my name, but the voice sounded stretched, like it traveled through water. My legs wouldn't hold me and my eyes couldn't focus, but I felt arms lifting me, felt the weight of gear shifting, heard radios crackling with voices layered on top of each other. I thought the nightmare was finally over. I thought once I was surrounded by people again, the desert would release me. But even in that moment, half conscious and barely breathing, I knew something wasn't right. The air felt heavy behind me, like a presence pressing against my spine. One of the rescuers, the one closest to my head, stopped suddenly and looked past me toward the rocks we'd just passed. He didn't say a word, didn't shout, didn't panic. He just froze, staring at something I couldn't see. Another rescuer asked him what he was looking at. He didn't answer. He just whispered, barely audible, "It moved." Those were the last words I heard before everything went black. I woke up inside the helicopter with a mask over my face, strapped to a stretcher. The blades above me were pounding the air hard enough to shake my bones. A medic leaned over me, shining a light into my eyes, asking questions I couldn't fully process. "Do you know your name? Do you know where you are? Can you breathe? Can you hear me?" I answered yes to all of them, though not because I was sure. I just knew I had to get out of the desert. Everything else could come later. But the medic wasn't really focused on me. He was focused on my arms. He kept turning them over, checking the marks. Those thin, parallel lines, those faint, cold patterns. And every time he brushed his glove across them, the lines glowed for a second. Not bright, not like a flashlight. More like heat lightning inside the skin. He didn't say anything about it during the flight, but I caught the way he kept glancing at the other medic. Something unspoken was hanging between them. Fear, confusion, something that had no place inside a medical helicopter. When we landed, everything moved fast. They took me straight to a survival treatment unit. Fluids, tests, cooling pads, protein supplements. I was drifting in and out, fighting sleep because every time I closed my eyes, I saw that featureless silhouette standing inches from my face again. Hours passed before the lead rescuer came into the room. He was a tall guy, sunburned, exhausted, but sharp. The kind of man who'd spent his entire career pulling lost hikers out of impossible terrain. He closed the door behind him. "Look," he said, "I've done this job for 22 years. I've seen heat exhaustion, dehydration, confusion, everything. But what we found next to your last camp..." He took a breath. "We've never seen anything like it." I asked him what he meant. He hesitated before pulling out his phone. He turned the screen toward me. The photo showed the ground near where they'd found me. At first glance, it looked like nothing. just sand and rock. But then I saw the pattern, a perfect circle carved into the earth, maybe 8 feet wide. Around the edges were the same thin lines that marked my arms, parallel, evenly spaced, glowing faintly in the sunlight. It wasn't scraped, it wasn't drawn. It was burned into the stone. "What is that?" I whispered. "That's what we want to ask you," he replied. I told him everything I remembered. The tapping, the breathing, the shadow, the figure that touched me, the spiral clearing, the drums, the mark that spread across my skin, the feeling of being watched from behind each rock. He listened, really listened, without interrupting. His expression didn't shift into disbelief. If anything, he looked like he was trying to match my words with what he and the others had seen out there. When I finished, he didn't say the usual comforting lines people expect in stories like this. He didn't tell me it was dehydration. He didn't tell me my mind was playing tricks. He didn't tell me any of it was impossible. Instead, he said, "3 of my team members reported seeing something in the rocks while we were carrying you. Something tall, something that moved sideways, something that didn't react to the sunlight." My stomach twisted. He continued, his voice lower now. "We also found footprints, not yours, not ours." He swiped to the next picture. There they were. Large, deep, long stride. Exactly like the ones I'd seen circling my camp. "We scanned them," he said. "No animal matches this. No human either." I felt cold. Not physically, my body was warming up, but mentally. Like something had reached into my memories and held them tightly. "What do you think it was?" I asked. He stayed quiet for a long moment. "I think," he said finally, "that the desert has places on the map where we shouldn't be walking alone." He left the room after that, saying he'd return later, but he didn't. Instead, 2 researchers came in, official-looking people who definitely weren't part of the rescue team. They didn't introduce themselves. They just started asking questions. Precise questions, repeat questions. Questions about details I didn't even remember saying aloud. How tall was the figure? How did the shadows behave? When did the markings first appear? Did you hear any tonal patterns? Were the sounds rhythmic or chaotic? What was the shape of the clearing? How many times did the figure touch you? Their seriousness terrified me more than the desert did. They weren't investigating dehydration. They weren't investigating mental confusion. They were investigating something else. One of them eventually leaned forward and said, "These markings on your arms, are you aware they have continued to spread?" I looked down and nearly gasped. The thin lines, those faint glowing patterns, were no longer just on my forearm. They'd traveled past my elbow, reaching the inside of my bicep. Still painless, still cold to the touch. "Is that dangerous?" I asked. They didn't answer. They simply wrote something down and said, "We will run more tests." But the tests never happened. Later that night, something triggered the emergency alarm in my room. Not a fire alarm, but a silent alert. A nurse rushed in telling me, "We need to move you, now." She grabbed my IV pole and practically dragged me down the hallway. Red lights flashed, voices echoed, doors slammed. I asked what was happening. She just said, "Something is outside." Outside where? The building? The perimeter? My room? She didn't explain. But as we hurried past the main windows, I glanced through the glass and my heart nearly stopped. Near the edge of the floodlights, at the very limit of visibility, something stood in the sand. Tall, still, watching the building. A silhouette I recognized instantly. The same shape, the same unnatural posture, the same motionless stance. And then, without stepping, it slid a few inches to the left, like it was tracking the movement inside. My legs buckled. The nurse grabbed me, holding me upright, whispering, "Don't look at it, keep moving." They moved me to an interior room with no windows. The lights flickered continuously. Radios crackled. People whispered urgently. A few minutes later, I heard someone outside say, "It's gone." Gone. Just like that. The next morning, everything returned to normal, at least on the surface. The alarms were off. The researchers disappeared. The rescue team resumed their routine. I was told I could go home soon. But that's when I realized something terrifying. The marks on my arms, they weren't fading. They weren't healing. They weren't staying the same either. They were shifting, rearranging themselves, forming new patterns when I wasn't looking. Like whatever touched me in the desert was still inside me in some way, communicating, changing, preparing. Before I was discharged, the lead rescuer returned. He stood in silence for a moment, then said, "We checked the area again. The circle is still there. The markings are deeper now, and the footprints multiplied." "Multiplied?" I repeated. He nodded slowly. "Whatever was out there with you, there's more than one." I didn't know what to say. I still don't. But here's the detail that keeps me awake at night. They found something else too. Something they haven't explained to me, no matter how many times I've asked. A piece of fabric. Torn. Old. Faded. From a jacket that wasn't mine. The material was worn thin, sun-bleached nearly white, and frayed at the edges. The stitching was a design I had never seen before. Strange symbols, almost identical to the markings on my arms. They found it hooked onto a rock, 20 meters from where they found me. When I asked if they knew where the fabric came from, the rescuer just shook his head. "We ran it through our database," he said. "Clothing, military uniforms, expedition gear, even historical textiles. Nothing matches. Not from this region. Not from this century." He looked at the door to make sure no one was listening, then added, "And the fibers aren't breaking down the way fabric should. It's like it hasn't aged at all." I froze. Every hair on my body lifted. "What do you think it means?" I whispered. "I think," he said softly, "that you weren't the first person who met whatever's out there." He put a paper in my hand, my discharge form, then leaned closer and whispered, "And I don't think you'll be the last." He left without another word. That was weeks ago. Now I'm back home, physically safe, supposedly recovered. But every night just before I fall asleep, I hear it again. Tap, tap, tap. Sometimes on my window, sometimes on the floor, sometimes behind the wall. I don't know if the figure followed me back. I don't know if it marked me for a reason. I don't know what it wants or why it chose me. But I do know this. The desert didn't let me go. It only changed the distance between us. And the marks on my skin, they're still moving, still spreading, still glowing faintly, whenever the room gets dark enough.